Hello, and welcome to this webinar from the National Transit Institute. This is part 2 of our Livability in Transportation webinar series. It will focus on partnership, design, and implementation and funding. Thank you very much for participating in this webinar. Because this is the second in a two-part series, we encourage you to view the first part as well. You can find the link to that online. We will not be repeating the introductory materials in this session. Today's webinar is structured based on the Livability in Transportation Guidebook, supplemented by new research and material. The first webinar covered the first 3 chapters of this guidebook, plus updated material. First on our agenda today, we will have an introduction by Lily Schaup. Then we will have an overview of the guidebook from Shana Baker. Next, our 3 chapters will be partnership, design, and implementation and funding. And finally, we will wrap it up and discuss the next steps. Our presenters today will include Lily Schaup, representing the Office of the Secretary at USDOT, Shana Baker, representing the Federal Highway Administration, and Jeff Price from the Federal Transit Administration. And with that, I would like to hand it off to Lily for the introduction.
Great, thank you so much. It is important, I think, to start with a shared definition of livability. Most Americans don't use the terms sustainability, livability, or smart growth, and its definition can differ dramatically depending on the region and the community. The definition on this slide is condensed from the Livability in Transportation Guidebook. But one I like to use is that a sustainable community is an urban, suburban, or rural community that has more housing and transportation choices, is closer to jobs, shops, and schools, is more energy independent, and helps protect clean air and water. Livability in transportation includes things like road safety and capacity, integrating transportation and land use, and using the existing system more efficiently through transportation demand management and ITS solutions. USDOT has been working to promote livability strategies for some time now through a variety of different programs and offices. And what we are seeing is that communities that begin using these tools are able to support local decision-making and comprehensive planning. They are able to leverage a variety of financial resources to provide more transportation options. This is especially important right now when so many transportation agencies are facing budget shortfalls and trying to find ways to achieve more with less. Now I will turn it over to Shana Baker to talk about the guidebook.
Great. Thank you, Lily. I'll begin with a brief overview of the guidebook and then transition into partnership. The Livability in Transportation Guidebook was developed by the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration for use by transportation practitioners, decision makers, and the general public to advance livability. The primary purpose of the guidebook is to illustrate how livability principles have been incorporated into transportation planning, programming, and project development in urban, suburban, and rural areas. The guidebook includes examples of how communities used a balanced approach to maximize the effectiveness of existing resources and targeting transportation funds to support reinvestment in existing communities. This diagram depicts steps for incorporating livability into transportation planning decision-making. The steps are key processes or areas to input livability discussions and actions. The diagram shows how livability principles, concepts, and activities can be mainstreamed into each step in the transportation decision-making process. Now for partnership. Partnerships are fundamental in building and maintaining support for transportation projects. Partnerships can be utilized at any time throughout planning and implementation to help increase and diversify funding opportunities and to increase public support and technical capabilities. Partners can include a wide array of people from various sectors such as the public sector, institutional sector, and private, community, and civic sectors. Partners can span public, private, and nonprofit interests, which demonstrate coordination across interagency, interdepartments, and regional agencies. Partnerships can involve funding through discretionary grants or pass-through funding. Partnerships can also involve interagency partnerships, such as the HUD-DOT EPA Interagency Partnership for Sustainable Communities, which I will share more information about shortly. Partnerships can also involve public-private areas with coordination among public and for-profit entities. And finally, partnerships can involve overcoming barriers to incorporate livability into transportation planning and project development activities. One example of a successful partnership at the federal level is the HUD-DOT EPA Interagency Partnership for Sustainable Communities. Formed in 2009, the Partnership for Sustainable Communities works to coordinate federal housing, transportation, water, and other infrastructure investments to make neighborhoods more prosperous, allow people to live closer to jobs, saves household time and money, and reduce pollution. The partnership agencies incorporate 6 principles of livability into federal funding programs, policies, and future legislative proposals. We have also found that many regional partnerships, similar to the Interagency Partnership for Sustainable Communities, are being formed at the state and local levels. An example of a successful partnership at a regional level is the FasTracks program. The Regional Transportation District's FasTrack program is a multi-billion-dollar 12-year program to build 122 miles of new commuter rail and light rail, 18 miles of bus rapid transit, 21,000 new parking spaces at rail and bus stations, and enhanced bus service for easy, convenient bus and rail connections across an 8-county district in Denver, Colorado. As a public infrastructure project and one of the most ambitious transit system expansions in the country, the Regional Transportation District's FasTracks program gained broad community support, evidenced by a 2004 region-wide voter-approved sales tax increase of 0.4%. As costs for providing public infrastructure projects continue to rise, the Regional Transportation District is looking at innovative financing options for delivering the FasTracks program by using public-private partnerships. Public-private partnerships are typically long-term contractual agreements involving payments between a public agency and a private partner. Such an agreement would allow a private entity to borrow funds and repay costs over time, enabling the Regional Transportation District to spread out large upfront costs and preserve cash in the early years of FasTracks implementation. Public-private partnerships have a solid reputation for delivering projects on time and on budget. The Regional Transportation District is planning to utilize public-private partnerships to implement many of the FasTracks projects, including Denver Union Station, North Metro, and I-225 corridors, as well as the East Corridor, Gold Line, and commuter rail maintenance facility projects. The Route 50 project in Loudoun County, Virginia, is an example of a grassroots partnership. Communities on Route 50 in Loudoun County feared that a bypass widening project would result in higher traffic volumes and reduce safety due to higher traffic speeds. The communities believed the proposed project plan threatened the character of historic Maine streets while introducing further suburban development. In response to their fears, local citizens developed a consortium of local nonprofit organizations called the Route 50 Corridor Coalition. The coalition intended to develop a common vision among residents, businesses, elected leaders, and other interests. The coalition's efforts resulted in plans to support a more livable Route 50 corridor. Due to their efforts, the Virginia Department of Transportation was able to build on the highly participatory nature of the coalition's initial visioning process and continue a similar approach throughout the project development. The Gateway 1 corridor in Maine is a good example of what can happen when communities come together. Running through 21 of Maine's mid-coast communities, U.S. Route 1 serves many roles for local residents, municipalities, and the state. Route 1 is also challenged by congestion, population, growth, and increasing development pressure which cross multiple municipal boundaries along the scenic 110-mile transportation corridor. Given the breadth of interest potentially impacted by future changes, it was clear to communities in the state's mid-coast and to Maine DOT and other state and federal agencies that planning solutions spanning corridor boundaries would be needed. An early partnership framework was catalyzed by the agency's proactive response to its Regional Transportation Advisory Committee's request for a better transportation decision-making process to integrate local and regional land use practices along Route 1. The established partnership will ultimately guide and coordinate transportation land use and decisions along the corridor. In conclusion, partnerships created early from the ground up can translate shared visions and goals into realistic projects. Partnerships can also increase agency accountability and responsiveness. And finally, public and private sector involvement can clearly identify resources available for planning and implementation and then allocate responsibilities to the parties best positioned to produce the desired results. With that, I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Thank you, Shana. We'll now talk about the design chapter from the guidebook. Design is where an agency's efforts and approach toward livability is most visible to our communities. Designing for livability requires understanding who will use the system, including them in the design process, and incorporating their input into the final design. Livability-oriented design takes cues from the planning and project development process and is often explored at the concept level during visioning. Land use plans and policies, community characteristics, and local and regional policy goals can help define transportation facility design priorities. And finally, transportation projects that provide multimodal mobility and support compact mixed-use development patterns must incorporate an overall network approach linked to urban design and a detailed facility design that balances use by all modes. Design can be challenging. Common challenges faced by agencies working to apply livability-based approaches to project design include the fact that conventional design standards may need exceptions to meet livability goals and respond to the context. An example of this might be in street design, trees may be in the clear zone, which may not meet standards, so an exception must be thought about. Secondly, roadway access and mobility need to be balanced with land use context and a roadway's regional role. Third, road widening is controversial in established communities, but context-sensitive design approaches can provide realistic options to meet the multiple goals. Fourth, transit station area planning must balance multiple trade-offs between operational functionality, creating economic activity opportunities, and creating attractive public places. And the station typologies between an urban district and park and ride are a good example of the different trade-offs made based on the context of where the station is located. To counter those challenges, good design includes building on early concept-level designs in the visioning and planning phase, understanding who will use the system and incorporating their input, interactive public involvement at every stage of the transportation decision-making process is important. Also, developing innovative concepts that can provide more cost-effective solutions for a phased network approach. Incorporating context-sensitive solution concepts is a very key element, and I'd like to direct you to a resource at the Federal Highway Context-Sensitive Solutions website at federalhighways.dot.gov/context. Our first case study is the Massachusetts DOT Project Development and Design Guide from 2003. The goals of the program are to give communities more flexibility and input in designing local road and bridge projects, including bicycle and pedestrian accommodations. Second goal is to help preserve the character of our cities and towns. Third, to cut levels of approvals at the state level. In 2003, a 28-member task force comprised of representatives from municipalities, regional planning agencies, professional organizations, advocacy groups, and state agencies developed the vision and goals for this guidebook. Project development processes included 8 steps, with public involvement included in each step. The diagram on the right, the 2 diagrams, show 2 of the 9 context area types. These context area types provide context for roadway functional classification. Our next example are city street design standards. Cities are preparing design manuals, such as New York City's Street Design Manual, which is based on 8 principles, including that streets should be designed with an understanding of their role in both the local and larger planning context. The New York City Street Design Manual gives users the flexibility to determine which overall design is most appropriate and practical in light of the goals and priorities established throughout the planning process and the overall policies of the manual. Other example cities include Los Angeles, Charlotte, Chicago. The Los Angeles Downtown Design Guide was developed in 2009 to cover a wide area of downtown LA, which is to be applied in conjunction with new street standards to emphasize alternatives to cars and wider sidewalks. The guidelines were developed collaboratively between multiple city departments. The next case study is the Hillsborough Street Improvement Project in Raleigh, North Carolina. The project converted Hillsborough Street to a 2-lane, median-divided facility with on-street parking on both sides. It also included a 7-foot wide raised median, sidewalk bulb outs at intersections and mid-block locations, and several pedestrian signals. The original design featured newly emerging concepts such as roundabouts and pedestrian countdown crossing signals and mid-block crossings, which are now regarded as standard practices. As one of Raleigh's main connections to the expressway system, this project was attempting to serve the dual roles of business Main Street and an urban thoroughfare. It did not serve either of them very well before the construction of this new project. And initial motivation for this project came from the community residents who brought their project ideas to the attention of the City Council to gain funding and begin the project development process by creating a municipal service district along Hillsborough Street. This case study demonstrates that community objectives sometimes conflict with a roadway's designation, but that appropriate design can help meet both community and transportation system goals. The next case study is the Chattanooga Riverfront Parkway. This project was a conversion from a 4-lane limited access expressway to an urban surface street, which helped fulfill a long-term vision for transforming downtown Chattanooga, Tennessee. A network of intersections and not one interchange improved access to the community, and these multimodal connections to downtown really improved access to the river. The City of Chattanooga and River City Partners, a not-for-profit organization, commissioned a consultant team to develop a whole slew of plans based on this project and to redevelop the community. Our final example is a design example from the city of University Place in Washington State. University Place, Washington has a population of 31,000, and Grandview Drive is a street or a road along this community. As you can see on the slide, on the left is the before picture, and on the right is the after picture. This is an example of a complete street re-engineering for a suburban roadway, which included adding new sidewalks, bike lanes, multi-use trail, and intersection improvements, and some roundabouts to improve operation and safety. And it functions as the city's primary linear park space. The redesign of the road, built in 1995, resulted in speed reductions of over 8 miles per hour on average over traditional traffic enforcement, and it improved citywide. It improved to over 25 miles of sidewalks and bike lanes, and it reduced accidents by 37%. Injury accidents were down by 47%, and there was high community acceptance and support. Design conclusions. Design is where the agency's approach to livability is visible to communities, most visible to communities, and this includes our highways, our road designs, our transit, vehicles, and transit stations, and really a balanced approach includes all users and all modes. Secondly, community engagement. By participating in an agency's design process, community partners can understand what is possible within a reasonable cost and engineering parameters. Finally, design-based approaches rely on the context of the project, including the characteristics of the transportation system, including the demand, but really focusing on all modes and users, and looking at the context of the land use, the building characteristics, and the street function. For instance, how do the buildings on a street function in relation to the design of the transportation system and the road? With that, I'd like to hand it over to Lily Show.
Great, thanks. This last section of the guidebook deals with the last phase of the planning process, implementation and funding. Implementation and funding is the last phase, so these issues can pose some of the biggest and final hurdles to aligning transportation projects with livability goals. As many of the case studies you've seen today demonstrate, aligning investments with community livability goals can actually improve system performance and leverage additional public and private investment. In this last stage of the planning process, livability principles can be incorporated into tips and STIPs at multiple levels of government, from states all the way down to the project level. And doing so can result in phased projects that are coordinated with local development decisions and maximize the effectiveness of investments. Some of the approaches that we will explore this afternoon in the case studies are aligning regional visions and state policies. For example, agencies can use scenario analysis at a regional scale to identify appropriate locations for transit-supportive growth around existing towns and villages. Other case studies will look at using corridor and area plan level strategies, such as increasing street connectivity and connecting multiple modes of transportation. And finally, using project-level strategies such as performance measures and project phasing. On the innovative funding side, case studies will look at ways to increase project partners, both public and private, which can stretch limited public dollars and increase livability at the same time. The private sector can be instrumental in advancing livability at the local level, and some of the case studies will demonstrate that. Our first case study is the Atlanta BeltLine. The BeltLine project is an innovative project that integrates livability into both the funding and implementation elements. The project is to construct a multimodal transportation corridor along an old railroad right-of-way that encircles the city. To fund the project, the city looked to multiple agencies, local TIF financing, and over $35 million in private contributions. This widespread community financial support for the project built energy and enthusiasm for getting the project started. Since much of the redevelopment money from the city was coupled with private donations and maximized through the Atlanta BeltLine Corporation's involvement, it is now moving forward. On the implementation side, the BeltLine project is using a phased approach to move forward with elements of the project and build momentum for future sections. Key elements of the Atlanta BeltLine are being implemented under the BeltLine redevelopment plan, while other elements are in project design or scoping. Our second case study looks at the Maryland Department of Transportation and how they were able to align regional visions and state policy. Like many states, the Department of Transportation had limited funding to put towards transit-oriented development. These kinds of projects faced funding and procedural hurdles to providing adequate parking to support transit and the surrounding development. At the same time, public finance mechanisms available to Maryland DOT for other types of projects, such as tax increment financing, could not be easily applied to TOD because it is a private development with supporting public infrastructure. Finally, Maryland DOT was limited by legislation to using its funds for transportation public purposes, which included transit stations and supporting facilities, but not development initiatives. So Maryland changed the legislation to enable creative funding and implementation of TOD. The Office of Real Estate within the State Department of Transportation follows a TOD strategy built around the goal of surrounding stations with vibrant neighborhoods where people can live, work, shop, or eat, all within a safe and pleasant walk to the trains, subways, and buses. The program is ensuring that station areas are market-ready for development, educating Maryland state agencies and localities to understand the potential of TOD, and promoting TOD as a concept statewide within other agencies. Finally, the office is enhancing the potential for federal funding to expand transit by showing that development patterns can support transit. Maryland DOT is assembling resources that can design, entitle, finance, and construct market mixed-use, mixed-income TOD that supports the surrounding neighborhood. Our next case study moves to Fargo, North Dakota, where the town is using a corridor strategy to integrate livability and implementation. The town is leveraging the Broadway Streetscape transportation project to mobilize additional project partners and funding. The $10 million facelift of the Maine commercial and retail corridor is designed to slow down traffic, improve safety, and promote walkability. The area is now an official bike ped safety zone and features a multi-use path, on-street bike racks, and bike lockers. But the transportation elements in downtown Fargo's Broadway Streetscape project are linked to a larger redevelopment initiative and served as the foundation for the Downtown Fargo Redevelopment Framework. Started in 1999, the 39-block Renaissance Zone provides tax breaks for local developers that invest in the neighborhood. In addition, the local housing authority is leveraging HUD's Community Development Block Grant program to build almost 600 units of affordable housing, as well as doing storefront and downtown rehabilitation. As a result, the whole project, including the transportation components, building values in the Renaissance Zone have risen 110%, from about $100 million in 2000 to over $200 million in 2009. In addition, more than 60 infill and adaptive reuse condominium and apartment projects have been completed, with more underway. Similarly, the Mid-America Regional Council Green Impact Zone also leverages additional resources to achieve a greater transportation impact. The Green Impact Zone is a 150 square block area of Kansas City that has experienced severe abandonment and economic decline. Before the project, about 25% of its properties were vacant lots and another 1/6 in vacant structures. This MPO initiative was a way to concentrate resources in one specific neighborhood and coordinate the transportation investments with other investments to make a substantial impact on the residents' lives. By addressing social problems, economic dimensions, and transportation mobility simultaneously, the transportation investment has a bigger impact and more community involvement. The program is using a public-private partnerships as well as regional and local funding to align goals with implementation. And finally, another innovative funding strategy is the use of joint development. Joint development is an approach through which property interests owned or controlled by a transit agency are marketed to private developers with the objective of developing transit-oriented projects. Joint development can assist local jurisdictions with recapturing a portion of their financial contributions into the project, as well as continuing to make payments on long-term funding bonding concerns. Finally, the joint development can be a way to increase the local property tax base and generate other local revenue. The Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Association has an Office of Real Estate whose mission is to pursue joint development opportunities. Metro owns or controls substantial real estate in support of its transit operations, which can promote transit ridership and enhance the local community. Metro encourages transit-oriented development and provides opportunities for real estate partnerships through the joint development program. On the Rhode Island Rove project, Metro partnered with a private developer to build a mixed-use, transit-oriented development at Rhode Island Avenue's Brentwood Metro Rail Station. This is in Washington, D.C. The project includes building 275 Class A apartments, about 55 affordable apartments, retail, and other amenities on the property. These are dedicated to local community businesses and includes a shared parking structure. And as a result, Metro is hoping to increase ridership at the station and in the system overall. From these case studies, we can see that there are many strategies to incorporate livability into the implementation and funding stage. First, working at a regional or project level in several localities at once can be an effective way to develop and test new policies and programs. By broadening the scope, most MPOs can work on projects into their work program or TIP that address capacity issues on commercial corridors. Updating the project scope to include planning for a complete streets network, land use and development planning, or transit system expansion can relieve traffic growth along heavily used corridors and reduce congestion all at the same time. Similarly, operational strategies can help maximize the performance of the existing transportation investments. And finally, Agencies can incorporate housing and community development policies into investment decisions to better leverage the investment on the transportation project side. Now, turn it over to Jeff.
Okay, time for wrap up and next steps. In the second part of the Livability and Transportation webinar, we covered partnership, design, and implementation and funding. In partnership, we looked at how we can help overcome transportation challenges and promote livability principles while responding to the needs and expectations of a variety of stakeholders. In design, we looked at when transportation projects are designed with livability in mind, human factors and community context can be considered more effectively. And with implementation and funding, we can use operational strategies to support phased implementation of livability projects, and we can coordinate current funding and programs to implement livability initiatives. In part one of the Livability and Transportation webinar, we looked at visioning, where we looked at engaging communities and residents and stakeholders, planning and process, looking at an all-hands-on-deck approach, including a variety of stakeholders, and we discussed policy and continually evolving to incorporate and recognize new needs and new approaches to develop new programs. Next steps, we'd like to recommend that you look at select agency resources on the Partnership for Sustainable Communities website, sustainablecommunities.gov, and also our DOT, FHWA, and FTA livability websites. On the FTA website, we've got sections on bicycle and transit, livability grant programs, and transit-oriented development information. As you can see below is the Sustainable Communities website in the diagram. And again, the Livability and Transportation Guidebook can be downloaded at the FHWA Livability website. We hope that this webinar series helps further the conversation of livability for you, and thanks for participating today.